Hi, my name is Jules Webb, and I'm a regular Quaker meeting attendee. I've been at Nashville Friends Meeting for about 3 years, and my talk today is called Be Kind, Please Rewind, Possible Abolitionist Quaker Responses to Accelerationist quote-unquote nihilism. And just so everyone's aware, there's heavy discussion ahead, violent terrorism and extremism and neo-Nazis. So please take care of yourself, and I hope that we can all learn something and maybe end on perhaps a more empowered note. We'll see. On November 27th, 2021, the influential podcaster and commentator Joe Rogan posted this image to Instagram with the caption, quote, "We are in Kali Yuga, the age of conflict. All of the chaos we're seeing right now was predicted in Hinduism thousands of years ago. Civilizations move in predictable cycles, and we are in the lower left-hand square of the chart. Do your best to elevate yourself and the world around you from the madness that is in the air, but understand that this insanity is all part of an infinite process." Now, this seems like a strange thing for a comedian, podcaster, commentator type to post, especially because it has its roots in neo-Nazi subcultures. And as it were, Joe would probably have come into contact with these ideas through memes on the internet in reactionary circles, which ultimately root back to the fascists who appropriated the term Kali Yuga in Hinduism. In Hinduism, the 4 yugas denote patterns of civilizational rise and decline into immorality. Julius Evola translated this pattern into fascist political theory, proposing a quote-unquote world of tradition as a reaction to the dark age of decadence he believed the West had fallen into due to the social progress he abhorred, which he called the Kali Yuga. Now, what do we see here? This is an image that was a screenshot from an encrypted Telegram chat for neo-Nazi would-be terrorists. It depicts a cycle that starts with a decaying civilization and then sabotage on the part of a Nazi that then turns into electrical failure, production shortages, financial losses, socioeconomic crises, and total chaos, which then breaks the cycle and allows Nazi Party members to ascend to power. And it says here, revolution doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes determination, guts, and a bit of cleverness and a few pushes in the right directions, and it will all come crumbling down. Now, the presence of chats like this has led to their phenomenon gaining the nickname Terrorgram. The image displays a roadmap for accelerating civilizational collapse and riding its waves to a fascist regime. Now, if we're trying to see where these chats and posts connect to real life and not just internet spheres of a minority of the population, we can see the rise of mass violence through the lens of radicalized despair. Frederick Jameson said, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, and it has led us to a point of real cultural despair due to changes in culture, the environment, and the economy in terms of mass death, all seeming to happen faster than anyone can keep up with." People in Gen Z don't want to trust either of the two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States. And so the political action that comes next, the only logical conclusion in a worldview that can see us as not being able to do anything productive, is to do destructive actions. Not every mass shooting is connected to this phenomenon, but this radicalized despair turns into mass shootings. Kids symbolize the future. The school shooting is emblematic of the loss of the future when kids are shot in their schools for undiscernible reasons. Nihilist violent extremists are criminals who act in furtherance of political, social, religious goals that derive primarily from a hatred of society at large and a desire to bring about its collapse by sowing indiscriminate chaos, destruction, and social instability. There have been a growing number of incidents categorized with this label. We can point to the phenomenon of accelerationism, especially in conjunction. We can point to this neo-Nazi apocalyptic theme that the future that we have been promised as a generation no longer exists. Now, right off the bat, we need to dispel the myth that nihilism is really the problem here. Fundamentally, this is a phenomenon brought about by the consequences of capitalism and fascism, and in popular far-right Christian imaginations, nihilism often stands in for the decrease in confidence in the existence and cult of one God, especially the Christian God, in an increasingly informed, global, and technologically complex world. Nihilism is this boogeyman, this scapegoat that takes the blame for violent tragedies that are truly caused by nationalism, militarism, right-wing gun culture, violent religious zeal, and capitalism. So what actually started it? The futurist philosopher Nick Land wrote a bunch of theory about where capitalism was going, which later became known as acceleration theory. In 2007, Land wrote, quote, "In modern times, the clearest example of history in the ancient great cycle mode is found in the work of another German socialist philosopher, Oswald Spengler. Modeling civilizations on the life cycles of organic beings, he plotted their rise and inevitable decay through predictable phases. For the West, firmly locked into the downside of the wave, relentless accelerating degeneration can be confidently anticipated." Elsewhere, Land famously said, "Nothing human makes it out of the near future." Eventually, he started affiliating himself with the far right and started calling for techno-monarchy and gained a following as a quote-unquote hyper-racist. All the while, what he predicted came to pass in economic terms. The Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg typified the explosion of Silicon Valley's ideology with his phrase, quote, "move fast and break things," unquote. The social destabilization wrought by Facebook gave rise to Trumpism, a politics of moving fast and breaking political systems, as we saw with the Department of Government Efficiency, helmed by an openly fascist tech billionaire, Elon Musk, who enables the mainstreaming of rhetoric like that which is previously shown in the Terragram group chat. Now, some traits of accelerationist ideology, which is varied and a bit more rhizomatic and decentralized than something that was just thought up by one person alone, generally revolves around themes of reaction against TINA, the neoliberal ideology of quote-unquote there is no alternative, that we haven't got any other systems to look forward to in the future developing after capitalism. There's no development into socialism and there's no development into tradition. We are just moving forward into another form of capitalism after another. Now, we also get the idea of violence as a meme, and so that coincides a lot with the online hate because the neo-Nazism, online misogyny, as well as real videos of gore and sexual violence circulating, these things lead to widespread media desensitization, and the overall effect is the desire to replicate this violence as the only valid political praxis. So this will sometimes be violence that is targeted at particular minoritized groups, but oftentimes it's also just random, and the idea is war against society as a whole. And so what we're looking at is violence as a meme, violence as something that gets you clout or fame, and when you die or become incarcerated as a result of your work, you become part of the saints culture of these networks online. One other aspect of this is the desire to mainstream the idea of Rahowa, or a racial holy war, and this is the idea of witnessing or intensifying the contradictions of modern capitalist society in the hopes of starting this holy war, which could also be understood as the next turning of the wheel or a second civil war, and the hope is that you're ushering in the future by rejecting linear temporal succession, and that goes into the relating to time differently aspect, where you are rejecting the time of capitalism, which only moves forward. And finally, as a part of this, we have the left accelerationist segment, which ultimately turns into a kind of quietism, where through voting or symbolic action, all that leftists really need to do at the end of the day is sit back and watch capitalism collapse in on itself. And this ultimately isn't a very active form of politics, it's a more passive form. It doesn't give us much hope for what we can actually change. Politics in this mode is only something that's done to us, not something that we really actively participate in. Now, in the local context of Tennessee, we can point to a few events where accelerationist violence has shown up either through the form of physical violence in the world leading to death, or else hate speech and displays of intimidation. One example of this would be on the 22nd day of the first month of this year, a 17-year-old named Solomon Henderson shot 2 kids, killing one at Antioch High School, just 19 miles from our meeting house here in Nashville. And then in the last few weeks, there's been a festival occurring under the American Renaissance heading at the lodge at Montgomery Bell. And this neo-Nazi conference is connected to the Unite the Right rally in 2018. Those people are at the American Renaissance Festival, and this took place just 33 miles from here. And then finally, a few times a year, the neo-fascist group Patriot Front marches around the Tennessee Capitol and holds demonstrations in the area to intimidate people of color and queer and trans folks just 2.3 miles from here. And part of their program is that if you want to be a part of their organization, you have to put up their propaganda. So I don't say all of this to scare us, but this is just to give us a sense of the regional and local relevance of this accelerationist problem and expressions of violence at a structural level that exists in Tennessee and around the country. So let's take a breath and remember where we are. We're here at our meeting house in the midst of all of this. We're Quakers. We sit in stillness or we quake. And our intentional silence in the noise of the industrialized and anti-democratic world we live in is an interruption, but that silence itself is intentionally interruptible by the voices and needs of our community. We vibrate in place, we create a different relationship to time, and within the scope of our lives and the scope of our shared history, we gain a different identity than that which capitalism or the state can give us. Quakers emerged from the history of Christianity partly as a continued expression and partly as a schism. Quakers repeat our rituals week by week and renamed the days of the week and year. There is so much to appreciate in the dissident temporality of Quakerism. That said, Quakers today find themselves within their own sort of schizophrenic temporality. The tradition is caught between the forward-moving teleology of creating something after Anglicanism or Christendom, caught up in settler colonial projects, and the American progressive narrative of linear time. And then on the other hand, Quakers are involved in the social reproduction of our religious institutions and lifeways, preserving our own sort of status quo through a form of cyclical time. We have complicity in the slave trade, the creation of concentration camps for indigenous children, and the desecration of the earth by way of the Quakers involved in all of this, both pushing to always start over afresh through colonialism and conserving the status quo through liberalism. So too often, Quakers are both in and of the acceleration of ecological collapse and the progress of the West, which has led us to this point. All of that said, I would invite you to take 3 minutes with me to sit in the Quaker testimonies, which often go under the acronym of SPICES, or SPICE: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equity, equality, and stewardship, which we put in parentheses because our fellow member Tom Kunish problematized certain denotations of the word due to the question of property ownership and colonial land ownership in particular. After we've taken our 3 minutes with these testimonies, I want to give us some food for thought with the differentiation between circular and linear time and how this is often understood as a bit of a binary. In reality, we could understand time as more of a spiral. It's kind of a both and between this either or of linear and circular time. And this is also similar to the differentiation between Kairos time and Chronos time. Kairos time is more concerned with seasons and especially seasons of life, which don't map onto industrial timescales as much, whereas those industrial timescales are more the domain of Chronos time, which is the time that is devouring its children. Now, spiral time is fugitive from this linearity, this capitalist futurity, and the cyclicality of conservative time. And as Quakers, we have a practice of intentionally sitting in that time. There are true benefits to the Quaker tradition with regard to how we interact with time fugitively from these structures of time that bifurcate how we can perceive our lives and in turn bifurcate us from each other in our communities. Next, I want to introduce us to this exercise, which I found from Sarepty's Vintagia project, which is affiliated with Acid Horizon, an amazing podcast. And this comes out of their interpretation of the VCR, ordinarily understood as the video cassette recorder, which they renamed the Virtual Chronological Reconfiguration Panel as a way of remembering where we are in time and contemplating what our thoughts are telling us in this meditative space that we can create together. So we're going to take 3 minutes after I go through the prompts to find space in our mental landscapes and to have a different kind of attention. So first, I have the record button, which prompts us to keep our memory alert, either writing things down or intentionally keeping hold of whatever insight comes from this exercise. And remember that you are actively living your life now. Next, the rewind button. What happened to lead us to the current state of affairs? What aspects of the past keep rearing their heads? What historical processes are we engaged in? Where can repair potentially occur? Then we have the play button. Instead of taking every thought captive, let your imagination have a conversation and pay attention. When we don't subject our minds into constant quote-unquote usefulness, what desires emerge? Then we have the fast forward button. What experiences require gritted teeth? Where can we trust in the process instead of seeking control? Then we can use the pause button. What thread that you've explored only partially so far can we stay with for a little longer? And then the stop button. What needs to stop entirely? Who needs to stop it? Why does it need to stop? Then we have the slow motion button. What details could you be missing in real time? What processes are moving too fast? What processes are moving too slow? Where can we practice patience? And then finally, we have the eject button. Cease contemplation and begin action. So the next exercise is to take 3 minutes to sit with the virtual chronological reconfiguration panel. Think about the prompts that have been offered and let them guide you into some form of insight, or else enjoy the next 3 minutes of silence. As a final word, I want us to consider what we can learn from accelerationism as Quakers and as students of abolition. We have to really understand that capitalism can't continue, and the left-right binary is expired. We have to intentionally imagine what comes after collapse. Youth need to be remembered and appealed to. Quietism can tempt us all, but we should be cautious about assuming history has moral arcs that move all by themselves. We might remember that there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth, but rather we are all crew, as Marshall McLuhan so famously said. Organizing requires that we move at the speed of trust, resisting the burnout of false urgency and contextualizing our motivations within a history of a movement that struggled before us and will continue after us helps us prevent this burnout. Affording dignity and legitimacy to Kairos times over Chronos times, when possible, is a way to care for those who practice liturgical temporalities, Crip time, meaning the time of disabled people, and queer temporality, among other pre- and post-colonial ways of relating to time. And finally, we have to remember that trauma is a way that time exists in the body non-linearly. Trauma impacts our movement building and must be attended to. When tragedy strikes, we respond full of care through the grieving process, which can be intimately bound to necessary political action. Thank you for coming to this talk, and I am so grateful to everyone whose feedback helps encourage me to fine-tune the content here, as well as all of the people whose sources helped me gain a deeper sense of how to present this information accurately and with nuance. Please continue to check out more about accelerationism, and I will recommend especially the podcasts It Could Happen Here, Weird Little Guys, and Behind the Bastards, all of which come from the excellent Cool Zone Media. And if you liked this talk, please share around to help spread the information here to those who might benefit from learning it. Thanks again for your time.